Hello Maddie, and hello the rest of the internet. My name is Bailey, and this is Once Upon a Coffee Cup. And today we're doing a wrap-up for the stories that I read, watched, saw, heard, created. I didn't create any stories in the month of March. My month was a little bit lacking in the story department just because of work and travel, but for the first time in a long time, every single story that I listened to or read or watched was a story that I genuinely loved, which doesn't happen very often, and I was really excited about that. I made good picks this month, and so it just made my experience in the storytelling atmosphere so much better. So let's talk about those. So the first story that I brought into my life in the month of February was the second book in the Infernal Devices trilogy, which is Clockwork Prince by Cassandra Clare. This is the story of a girl named Tessa in Victorian England, where in the first book she finds out that there are things like demons and vampires and werewolves and demon hunters. And she's caught up in this world and she's being hunted and lots of craziness happens. And so this is the second book. It kind of is a bridge book between the first and the third book. If you have to read this trilogy in order, like you cannot pick up the second book or the third book or you'd be super confused. But there's kind of a sophomore slump in trilogies. There's this battle between bridging two stories and having it being its story on its own. And I think this one definitely fell into a little bit of that bridge category just because from its own standpoint, there's not a lot of hard, solid plot structures. Instead of having a nice rising plot, climax, and dropping off, it kind of seems like it's all rising and then all of a sudden there's a climax, and so that's kind of interesting that it doesn't follow necessarily key storytelling structures. Nevertheless, having read the first one and then reading this one, I did feel like it was a good continuation, and it was great because especially the character of Will Herondale, there's a lot of character development for him in this book. In the first one, he seems rounded out, but you don't get to see a lot of why he is the way he is, and so you kind of can have a love-hate relationship with him. But in this book, you learn a lot more about his backstory and a lot more about just kind of the reasons why he does what he does, and it makes you fall in love with him as a character. I actually liked Tessa more in this book than I did in the first book, because in the first book she kind of seemed like everything was happening to her, and that's in Clockwork Angel, but in this book it kind of seemed more like she was taking life by the horns. She was taking life in her own hands, and she was going after what she wanted, and she was participating and protecting the people she loved. That made me like this book a lot more. Yeah, I would give this book, I think I gave it on Goodreads 4 out of 5 stars. The only reason it's not 5 stars is because of some lacking plot points, but other than that, I'd recommend this book, but also only if you've read Clockwork Angel. So the second book that I read this month was Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, which is the first book in the Grisha trilogy. And this book is the Once Upon a Coffee Cup book club book of the month. So Maddie and I are reading a book every single month together, and then we're going to post a video next week about this book. So we're going to do a book talk coming soon to a YouTube near you. I can't tell you what I thought about this book because of that video. Except for because of the beginning of this, that I liked every single book and movie and TV show that I watched this month. So, spoiler for next week's video, I liked it, but I'm not going to tell you how much, and I'm not going to tell you anything about the story. If you want to know my thoughts, you're going to have to watch that video. So there. Moving on. Throughout this month also, I was traveling a lot, and so I decided to listen to an audiobook as I was driving to and from. I did Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in December or January, one of the two. And then I decided to listen to Aragon by Christopher Paolini. I missed out on reading Aragon when I was younger. I was a little bit too young And then once I wanted to read them, my dad was reading our copies, and so I never got a chance to read them. I think somewhere along the line I actually read the first one, but it was so long ago that I forgot everything in it. But so I decided to listen to the audiobook because it had been a long time and I was curious and I didn't want to pick up the giant book that it is. And I loved it. Christopher Paolini wrote the book when he was 15, I think, around there somewhere. And it's a story about a dragon rider named Aragon who thinks there's no such thing as dragons. He thinks it's all myth and lore, and then all of a sudden he finds a dragon. And so it's the story of him learning how to become a dragon rider. World building could use some work, but at the same time, Aragon came out before fantasy really hit its stride. The only other fantasy books that were around like were like Lord of the Rings and just like classic adult fantasy. There wasn't a lot of children's fantasy to this extent, with a whole new world, so many different races and species all interconnected and kind of following that classic chosen one arc, but not like Harry Potter, there's a prophecy, but more of like he's chosen because he's a dragon, which is cool. I fell in love with the story. I think it's a brilliant depth into fantasy, especially if you haven't really read fantasy. Don't get me wrong, I love Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is fantastic, but Lord of the Rings is hard to read. Tolkien has a way of like bogging down his words and being very intellectual because he's building a whole universe. He's building this entire world system that hasn't been created yet. He was one of the first. He has to set up so much more. But Aragon can fall back on those tropes, and so he doesn't have to do as much world building as, say, Tolkien or C.S. Lewis and Narnia and things like that. And so I think Aragon is probably a good baby step into the world of fantasy, especially the traditional sense of fantasy. I gave Aragon 3 out of 5 stars because I loved it. It was great. It was nostalgic and it was sweet. It got docked for world building. He was 15 or 16 when he wrote it. His world building's not that wonderful, but it's still fantastic for a 15, 16-year-old. It's a good book. It's not fantastic, and it's not the best book ever, but it is a good book, and I would definitely recommend it to people. So 3 out of 5. The next story that I watched was Captain Marvel, named Veers. Captain Marvel is the story of a girl named Veers who is part of this alien race that is governed by an artificial intelligence, but then she finds herself on the planet Earth and some things about her past become known, and she kind of has to navigate what is good and what is evil in this world and redefine who she trusts and what truth is in light of the new circumstances. And that's really all I can say without giving you any spoilers. My reasoning for loving Captain Marvel is because it is, in my opinion, such a fantastic female lead superhero movie. It's probably one of the best. I honestly would argue that I liked it more than Wonder Woman, which is crazy because Wonder Woman is fantastic. In Wonder Woman, you kind of leave the theater with the feeling of she's strong despite her emotion. And then in Captain Marvel, what I loved is that she's strong because of emotion. And that message to me is so much more empowering and insightful because it's saying, you know, your strength lies in your vulnerability and your ability to love and your ability to draw on those emotions. That's what makes you human. That's what makes you strong. And I thought that message was personally so much stronger and so much hard-hitting, and so that's why I love Captain Marvel so much. Plus, she's sarcastic. She's not sassy for the sake of being sassy, which some female superheroes can be, but she's sassy and like calling out the ridiculousness of a situation, and just, it's a different kind of humor, and I love it so much more. And so I gave Captain Marvel a 4 out of 5 stars. Fantastic. There were some little things that I had issue with, but not enough for me to dock it any more than 1 star. It was fantastic. Would recommend everyone go see it. So yeah, that's all of the stories that I watched, read, partook in this month. That's all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed comment down below, like, subscribe, all those random things. Stay tuned for that Shadow and Bones book talk. We're super excited about it. We'll let you know at the end of that video what the book for next month is if you want to read along with us. That would be wonderful. Yeah, it's been great. This is Once Upon a Coffee Cup. Yep. Alright, bye. The first book is The Girls by Emma Cline. I found this book on Paperback Dreams channel, and it's about cults, which I'm super excited about because, I mean, I'm there for